Hi, everybody. Jason here from a somewhat unusual location for the Tablas Creek Instagram Live broadcast. I am in Vermont, as you might guess from the green trees over my head. I'm still here. I was here 2 weeks ago for my last conversation. But this week offered a little bit of extra excitement. We had a big thunderstorm roll through town that knocked out our power and our internet up at the house that I grew up in. So I am sitting on the town green on a public bench using the Chester, Vermont public Wi-Fi. So I apologize if there's a little bit of road noise behind me. Main Street in town is only about 50 yards away, but I think we're going to make it work. My guest this week is Brenna Quigley. She is the host of the podcast Roadside Terroir. She's a great geologist and really an advocate for the expressiveness of place in wine, and I can't wait to talk to her. But as I normally do, as we're waiting for people to join, I'm going to share a few pictures taken by Neil Collins, our winemaker, and by Ian Consoli, our director of marketing, because I want to give you a sense of what's going on at the vineyard. So the big news for us is that we have seen the first little bits of veraison. So this is a picture of some Syrah up at the top of the property. It is not representative of what we're seeing overall. It's just the very beginning stages. We are probably a week ahead of where we were at the stage last year, which suggests that we're maybe looking at sometime last week of August to start harvesting. But so far, things look good. The vineyard itself looks amazing. A couple of Neil's pictures. You can just see the health of the vineyard. It looks incredible. One more from a head train dry farm block. You can't even see the space between the vines, and these vines were planted 12 feet apart. So it's remarkable. So much vigor. It's been hot, but not damagingly hot over the last couple weeks. So a lot of days in the upper 90s to around 100, but things look really good. A couple more pictures of what's going on. We are working on trellising a new block where we have alternated rows of Grenache and Syrah. We're hoping to trellis the Syrah up high so that it is able to sprawl over and shadow the Grenache a little bit and help keep it from bleaching. I talked about this a little bit in an explainer last year, but it's nice to see it actually in the works. The vine's big enough to be trellised up high. In the cellar, we are working on blending the 2020 Esprit, reblending the 2020 Esprit. It's been living in different foudres over the last year or so. So we're reblending it, making sure that it's all the same. And we'll be bottling it week after next. We cannot wait to show it to you. 2020 is looking really good. One more picture that Ian got, which I think is particularly cool, is the color of the Esprit. We're racking it out of foudre, so we're trying to measure when we start getting a lot of sediment so that we can rack it clean and not have to filter. Okay, so that's it. That's the big story of what's going on at Tablas. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to invite Brenna to join me. And there's your invitation right there. So I think this is going to be a treat. I'm excited about this. Hey, Brenna.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going great. How are you?
I'm doing good.
Where are you joining from?
So yeah, I'm in kind of a similar position, although not in a public park, but I'm visiting family as well. So I'm in Michigan with actually I'll just show you because it's so beautiful. That's Lake Michigan right behind me.
I can hear the birds chirping behind you also. That sounds
yes,
pretty
yeah,
solid.
They're relentless.
Cool. Awesome. So I usually like to start by asking people to kind of trace their path into wine. And you're in an interesting place at kind of the intersection of wine and geology. And I'm curious whether your interest in wine came before or after your interest in geology, or did they develop together?
I guess probably definitely after, at least the level of interest that I have now was definitely after. I went to school I did my master's degree at the UC Santa Barbara. and started even throughout all of kind of my grad school time, I just loved going wine tasting, and I was just like constantly trying to get other geologists and friends to come join me and explore and learn things. And eventually started working for Seth Kunin at the tasting room when I was writing my thesis, just because I wanted to get a little bit more involved, and I thought it would be a fun way to transition between things. And I had no idea, but it was like within a couple months of working in wine, I was obsessed. I was like, I always tell people, like, I remember stacking shelves with wine bottles and just being like, I love this. Like, I could just stack shelves all day long.
Having done a fair amount of stacking of wine bottles in my introduction into wine, that's real dedication. It is not the fun part of the job, to be sure.
No, but it's weirdly satisfying, I found.
Cool. Well, Seth is an icon. Was an icon. We lost him way too young. What, 5 years ago or so? Was he sort of formative in the kind of your growth and interest in wine and the way you think about wine?
Oh yeah, absolutely. He was wonderful. And, like I said, I got a job at a tasting room just with a little bit of interest in mostly just in wine. And I didn't really understand the geology connection. And so he was amazing at kind of bringing me into it really quickly. And he actually, before he got into wine, he was in the medical field. So he was very, very scientific and very, very technical, and loved the kind of idea of looking at researching papers and doing, experimental things all within this kind of like realm of science, which I think for me was an awesome introduction to things, because it was so relatable to have this really kind of hard science background and thought process behind, what we were thinking about and what we wanted to do.
Cool. So trace your next step. What happened after that? How did you go from there into? I mean, I think the first time that I became aware of your work was looking at some of the maps that you were drawing that I saw posted online. What was your next step?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I was like 1,000% in once I was in, and I literally would do anything that I could to just further learning about things, further my education, get more hands-on experience. And so within a couple months, Seth introduced me. It was actually a Christmas Eve dinner. I was working at the tasting room over Christmas, and so they invited me to have dinner with them. And there was Ted Vance, who I think who's the Source Imports, one of the presidents of the Source Imports, who has a wonderful portfolio, and Raj Parr. And I think Raj at the time had just started writing the Atlas of Taste. And so the two of them are way into geology, and just spent the whole night like grilling me with questions about like just intro geology. And I remember having this moment of like, I was so intimidated because I knew these were like really important people. And there's this moment where I was like, oh wait, I know the answers to all of these questions. This is awesome.
Because you came into this with so there are a lot of winemakers, a lot of wine growers have kind of just enough knowledge about geology to get themselves into trouble, in my experience. And yet you came into this with this incredibly kind of relevant and deep experience in this one facet of what wine is about. That must have been cool. Did you realize at that point, like, okay, this is an area where like I can bring to bear the specialized knowledge that I have to something of kind of general interest in the world of wine?
Yeah, totally. And I mean, for me, it was really like, I think another thing that I was really lucky about was I met so many people who were, there is a lot of kind of, know enough to be dangerous, but so many people who were really committed to learning about it, and really, really, really dedicated to trying to understand it. And, certainly not many people had the kind of structured level of educational background in geology that would actually be required. And so for me, it was more like, oh, I think I can, like, let me help you. I met Jamie Motley really early on, who's amazing, and she was taking a community college intro geology course. And I was like, that's a ton of work. Like, that's not fair. Like, like that's a lot to ask someone who's working multiple jobs and is, making wine and trying to really learn as much as they could. And so I really looked at it as like, let me help you find some tools to talk about what you want to talk about in a way that will make you feel more confident, and also in a way that will allow people to just communicate more. So I didn't see my role as, I hoped that maybe someday I could have a role in understanding these concepts better. But my first goal was, let me give you the tools that you need to do the work and the research and the thinking and the understanding that it takes from a really deep wine background.
Awesome. And so, at what point in this process did you decide that one of the ways that you were kind of going to bring this knowledge to the larger audience was to start a podcast?
Oh, yeah, so I did a small project with the Austrian Wine Marketing Board, who's fabulous. And they reached out to me after kind of this quick little regional thing, and they said, "What if you could do anything, what would you want to do? Like, we would love to like put something together." And no one had ever asked me that. I was just kind of like, "Oh, I'll do anything. Like, you want me to draw you a picture? I'll draw you a picture. You want me to like give a talk? I'll do it." And I was like, "Oh, what an interesting thing." And I had always had the thought of wanting, in geology, we have these books called the Roadside Geology, and it's kind of a roadside guide written by geologists for other geologists. So if you go to, Northern California, if you go to Texas, if you go to, Michigan, there will be a Roadside Geology of Michigan book. And so you can pick it up and it'll give you a little driving tour of what you'll see and what you need to know to kind of appreciate your drive. And I always thought that's so similar to what we do in New Region. We kind of throw ourselves in and we want to understand what vineyards we're seeing when we drive by. We want to understand how this place is different. And I was telling a friend of mine about this, and they said, well, if it's something that people are listening to that in their cars, it should probably be audio. And which I'd never thought of. And so that was like, but I was like, well, that's brilliant. So like, let's give it a try.
Awesome. And you're now like midway through the second season?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is a huge thing. Yeah.
I mean, it is a huge thing. So do you have, I mean, you visited different regions, you've explored this in lots of different, uh-oh, I see it is buffering right now. Well, hopefully it will catch back up. Okay, I see you again. Are you back? Can you see me?
Okay, great. Oh yeah, I'm not sure. You were paused for a moment too. I'm not sure which side it's coming from, but I can hear you now.
It could easily be on my side, given again that I'm on the town green, on a park bench. So
yeah.
Sure, I'm not the only user of this Wi-Fi. So do you have what was the first region that you dove into for your podcast, and why did you pick that to start?
Yes, so it was supposed to be Austria. So they loved the idea, and that was we were all set to go. We had all of the visits lined up, and we had our flights booked for March 2020. And so that never quite worked out, and we are excited about putting that back into play soon. But me and the friend of mine who was helping with the first season, we were trapped in Santa Barbara, and not a bad place to be trapped. And so we were like, let's just do Santa Barbara. So we just kind of threw it together and tried to, use this time that we had to create something exciting. And we did Santa Barbara, and people loved it. It was way more involved and creatively satisfying than I had ever planned for. And so I started working with the Wassermans in Burgundy really early on, and they were instantly very excited about the idea of doing a Burgundy podcast, which was kind of the dream. So,
I mean, I think Burgundy is probably the wine region where at least the geology differences between one hillside and another, one village and another, the top of one hill and the bottom of one hill, has maybe been the most deeply explored. It sounds like an amazing place to get to dive into from a geological standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I mean, Burgundy, it's such a the depth of knowledge that exists there. People have been thinking about this very concept, like the idea of terroir, for hundreds, if not, thousands of years, which is crazy. And there are so many layers of, which is a really cool thing to explore. There are so many layers of earth and human interaction, and of humans' understanding of the earth, and of, like, you really kind of blur the lines between, what was, obviously the geology was there first, but in terms of the wine, like what matters first. And so it's a really interesting thing to discuss with so many people.
What was there anything really surprising that you learned coming out of that? Or did it sort of evolve in the way that you thought it would?
That's a good question. I mean, I've learned a ton. I think the thing with Burgundy is, like, it truly is a rabbit hole. Like, you'll never know it all. You'll never know everything. And I think for me, the big part has been probably just that, seeing that, and Burgundy's gone through a couple of, shifts in its thinking about things. And so there was a while where it was, as terroir was becoming a really popular term, where people were really focused on, there are faults in the hillside and there are divided up vineyards, and the faults in the vineyards follow each other perfectly. And I think that was sort of a miscommunication, like a mistranslation of really what was going on, or maybe an oversimplification of the geology. And so then there was this kind of backlash to that, where as things got mapped a little bit in more detail, that people were saying, oh no, like each vineyard isn't one specific kind, isn't one rock type, like it's actually more complicated. The faults aren't always right on the vineyard boundaries. And does that shatter our idea of what terroir is? And so it's kind of been fun to watch that thought process evolve a little bit, from like, oh no, like we thought that this is what it was, like is terroir over? And obviously it's not, but it's more complex than that. It's more nuanced, and it is there. And there's this region of all of this historic importance, these vineyards with these personalities that have been defined and understood for centuries, and are in this moment of trying to understand what it really means on a technical level, on a historic level, on a spiritual level, on a, all of that. So I think that that's probably been the most exciting thing to really pick through. And obviously there's not a super clear answer that can solve everything. Like, there's this rock type is X and this is Y, and but that would ruin the fun anyway.
So, what are there other regions in the ones that you've explored? Are there other ones that you feel like the geology is particularly fascinating, or particularly reflected in the wines in a way that you think is exciting?
Yeah, I mean, it's not the most, like, shocking answer that I could give, but I mean, the big thing that I've learned from working all over the place is that every region has incredible variability in their geology. And most, it's kind of a little bit of a joke, where every region likes to kind of brag about how many different soil types they have, or the complexity, which is, it is a little bit like everyone has it. And I think the areas that are most interesting are on one end of that spectrum for me. So it's places like Burgundy and Barolo specifically, where they have this geology and these terroirs that are pretty well understood. And they have, I would also say, Germany and like the Mosel is very similar as well, where there is this long historic documentation and knowledge on top of the geology that maybe is still getting figured out. That's amazing and fascinating to learn about. And then equally as exciting, there are all of these regions where the diversity is there and they're still figuring it out right now. And so it's in a moment of real discovery of how these things, come into play.
I think that's the place where Paso Robles is at the moment. I mean, yes, there are areas that have similar geology to other areas, but there's, like, we're all still in the figuring it out kind of stage.
Oh yeah, and there's so many there. Paso Robles, Santa Barbara, I would say same thing. There's like all the cool work that Abe is doing down in LA, which I love following and is so exciting. I feel, Napa Sonoma is a little more advanced in their knowledge of an understanding of terroirs, but I still think that in really marrying that idea, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm in a meeting, sorry. The other two dogs? They're upstairs. Sorry, there's
No worries.
dog walkers here. Really marrying that idea of, what they know so far and where they want to go and how they can really incorporate these ideas.
Are there regions that you haven't gotten a chance to explore that are at the top of your list of where you want to where you'd love to go next?
Definitely. I have to say the place that like kind of haunts me that I haven't been there for yet is Etna. I'm just kind of dying to explore that whole area, and this, I've seen some really young volcanic terroirs, but that would just be, definitely the very top of the list. Greece, I think, as well, which is kind of underappreciated these days. And I think that there's a lot of really cool, really young, really like dynamic, exciting geology that is there to be explored.
Super cool. So when people ask you, and you must get asked this a lot, like, how do you define terroir for people?
Yeah, I mean, I think I generally define terroir as all, everything that comes into play. So I think that, that comes into play to really being able to express what a place means, mostly to the winemaker as well. So kind of, to me, I think the winemaker is trying to express and convey some idea of what is, what makes this place special to them, what makes it unique, what sets it apart, what is there that can really make you kind of feel it and understand it, even if you're a world away just drinking a glass of wine. And so the geology, of course, is this big, main, immovable thing at the base of it. And then I think it's, the most beautiful wines are where, the farming and the winemaking really understands the interactions between that geology, the soil that comes from it, the climate that's interacting with it, and how it's sort of farmed and made into a final product.
Awesome. My dad's definition was, he defined it as somewhereness, like
Yeah.
the like the contribution of place in a wine. And one of the interesting things that he found, he dug up one of his old wine books that must have come from the 50s, written by Frank Schoonmaker, and it talked about terroir as something undesirable, that a wine that had a Gouda terroir is generally thought of as only happening in like not so good regions where you like earthy in the worst possible way. And it was sort of fascinating for me to think about how quickly, because it's only been 70 years since that was written, how quickly that's gone to being something that all of us who are in the world of making wine are doing everything we can to try to express. Like we're trying to avoid getting in the way of the terroir, of the character of place. And like a couple of generations ago, it was considered not necessarily a fault, but pretty close. Like it was a sign of low class wine, which I think is really fascinating.
That's fascinating. And I think there's so many things in the world that have gone through changes like that. And I mean, the first thing I think about is also farming. Like there is still this really old school idea of farming, particularly grapes, where they're trying to farm out the terroir as well. They're trying to farm out the differences in expression. Like one way to think of farming at a large scale is we want everything to be good and even, as opposed to thinking like we really want these different tiny little pieces of the property to express completely differently. And it's really kind of that idea of like letting things be, which I think is probably has happened a lot in parallel with that idea of.
Yeah, I think that's still an ongoing debate, like the extent to which like the human component is able, like, is the human component an essential piece of terroir? Is the person who farms it somehow a part of the terroir, or is it more that the person who is farming it is able to either emphasize or muffle the character of the terroir? Do you have a feeling on that debate?
You know, I mean, I don't really know. I think it probably goes both ways. I think that, I think the goal really should be, and the reason that kind of I stay inspired by meeting different winemakers is, there is constantly this desire to tell a story through what they're doing. And I think that the stories that inspire me the most are the ones where they're trying to tell the story of this place that means a lot to them, and that's the most exciting thing to try to be conveyed. And I think that, most winemakers that get really, really passionate, that's what, you can tell a story of the type of winemaking that you want to do. You can tell that story pretty well and pretty clearly. I'm not a winemaker, so maybe I shouldn't say so much, but you can impart a story of style. But I think the harder thing to do is to impart the kind of infinite complexities of the nuance of one particular place. And so, as I'm not sure about the debate itself, but I just know the things that I'm excited about hearing and supporting and getting excited about and drinking as much as I can of are trying to tell the story of why this place is unique.
Yeah, I fall very much in that same camp too. That um, that winemaking, if I'm tasting the winemaking and not the place, like, okay, fine, I get it, but it's not so much. Like, it's hard for me to find that really exciting. It's
Mm-hmm.
I remember reading a comment from Randall Graham at one point where he called, I can't remember whether he was accusing like California winemaking universities or California winemaking in general, but called it, it said that it should be renamed the Department of Terroir Prevention. um, but like it, I think there's some of that. There's certainly some of the, well, we want it to taste like our people who remembered it the year before. It needs to always taste like that. We need to add this yeast, and we need to add like that particular nutrient, and we need to do it in those barrels, and it needs to be this thing that we've created. Um, and I'm happy that that at least the paradigm has expanded enough so that there's room for a lot more than that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think, I mean, in the, our recent past, we learned a lot about yeast and barrels and this, and a lot about technique that I think also, I would imagine as a young winemaker is pretty exciting to learn about these tools. It's exciting to learn how you can use these things. And I think the wisdom of knowing all of that and then being inspired to, explain a place and start, stripping them away. It's probably a long process too. So it's, there's, it's all a part of it, I guess. But,
And I think a winemaker has to have a certain level of like comfort in their own skin to be willing not to have their fingerprints be the things that show. It's one of the things I've always really been grateful for, that in that Neil Collins, who's been our winemaker since the beginning, is that, I mean, he is more than capable of doing whatever sort of interventions are necessary, and yet doesn't feel like that needs to be his role. That he can step into the background and let the place speak as clearly as possible, and it's not in everybody's makeup. And I've always been grateful that that's been the winemaker who we chose at the beginning.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And, I think both Seth and then recently in a conversation with Cheese the Bees, the biggest thing that they always said was, like, the hardest thing is to do nothing. The hardest thing is to let go. And so I can see that.
For sure. So what is next for you? What's the like? What are you about to start working on, or what are you working on that people haven't seen yet, or what are you excited to work on?
Yeah, so there's quite a few things that I've been working on really hard ever since I moved to Napa, so about 2 years ago. And I've been really diving into kind of honing and understanding ways of understanding different properties and breaking them up into terroir zones. And I have a couple projects I'm working on wrapping up right now with Domaine Estates with Carlton McCoy on, defining terroir zones in a couple of vineyards that, again, it's, been several years of work going into it that I'm excited to finally be able to tell that story. And then I'm in a similar ongoing process with Quintessa and Flowers Vineyards, which, again, it's kind of it hasn't been talked about that much, but there's been a huge amount of work and research and time and attention and discussion that I'm really excited to start sharing that kind of technical work that we've been doing. And then we have about at least 6 months left of season 2 for Burgundy. So I'm about to head back to Burgundy. We're going to go there for harvest and do a little harvest special kind of exploration, and then, just really taking the time to make the rest of that season something worthy of the place that we're speaking about. So
amazing. Cool. And so for people who want to get to see those when they're ready to share, or who want to learn more about what you're working on, what's the best way for them to do it? Is just following you on Instagram, or is there obviously subscribing to the podcast? What else? What other ways should people stay up on what you're working on?
Yeah, that's probably the best. Subscribing, or, following us on Instagram, hit subscribe wherever you like to listen to your podcasts. We also have a mailing list where we send out updates for podcast related things and, special kind of events and features and stuff. So you can sign up for that as well.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you. It has been half an hour. It never feels like half an hour. It always feels like it goes by so fast. And really, I could hang out and talk to you all afternoon, but I imagine you probably have some other things that you would like to do on your vacation, and I think I might free up this park bench for somebody else to use. So, thank you so much. It's been Brenna Quigley, who has joined me from vacation in Michigan. I have been joining her from vacation in Vermont. So, we will see you back in the real world. So, thank you so much, Brenna.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Tablas Creek followers, I will be back in 2 weeks. I'll be joining you back from California, and my guest is going to be Wanda Mann, who writes for Somm Journal and for a number of other cool publications. She's somebody who I've known since high school, which is really cool, and I can't wait for you all to meet her. So I'll see you all in 2 weeks. Brenna, thank you again,
Thanks so much.
bye, everyone.
Okay, bye.